It's an ironic title, I know, but I have played Final Day a lot. This isn't one tournament day or two tournament days where you have the same list over and over for each game. Every game I played was different. I have played 1000 points and 2000 points. I played against different opponents each time, but Creations of Bile came up twice. Even then, one played for defense and chose extra toughness, the other went for random rolls and was happy with more attacks and increased weapon skill. Otherwise, diverse opponents. Some were heavy on tanks, some hordes of light infantry, some marines, some shooting focused, some melee focused armies. There were multiple days of games and different terrain setups each time. Only once was it L-shaped ruins. And I am not mad at that person whose name is one letter different from the name Tim for saying he had terrain and I shouldn't bring any terrain, and then found out that his idea of terrain was to cut a cardboard box into 8 pieces based around the corners to make 8 Ls. Then he drew windows on one ruin and said, oh, actually none of them should have windows. I won some games, I had some very close games, including a game with 1 victory point difference, and I lost games. This is how we learn. I learned a lot about this detachment and the tricks it can do. I learned how unforgiving it is when you make mistakes, and I learned a lot more about the Cult Ambush rule after the December rules changes. With this new version of Cult Ambush, you get fewer units back than if you rolled randomly, assuming average rolls. But rolls within one game don't conform to averages. Some games I had half my army back, other games I got 1 unit. You couldn't rely on your army rule to be there for you, and that is a problem. The Cult Ambush system feels better for us as we choose what we succeed at and can plan for this in the army building step. For whatever detachment you play, you will probably want to have the unit supported by the detachment to come back. Metamorphs in Xenocreed, Neophytes in Host of Ascension, Aberrants or Pure Strains in Biosanctic Broodsurge, and Jackal Bikers in the Outlander Claw. It is strategic reserve, so the Jackal Bikers can return from the edge of the battlefield without requiring Cult Ambush markers. Cult Ambush encourages lots of small units, and that is no bad thing for the Genestealer Cult. If you have a few heavy hitting units with characters, and the rest of the army made up of small units, that works. But these changes to Cult Ambush are not likely to affect our tournament percentage win rate. The Genestealer Cult went up in tournament win score, not after the changes to Cult Ambush in July that permitted Deep Strike Cult Ambush and the Cult Ambush markers were no longer needed, but from the big points drop in October that has remained in December through to March 2025. There was a high 58% win rate in November, but that is coming from the best players within our faction. Genestealer Cult is still a very difficult army for casual players, so I hope casual players can get a lot out of my videos. When making an army and picking which units you want to return by Cult Ambush, give yourself a few possible combinations of units. Neophytes have sticky objectives, that's the planned generations in the making ability. That is more valuable with fewer units coming back, even though they cost more resurgence points per army construction points. But ignore those points. A Metamorph unit is not better than 10 Neophytes if your task is holding an objective or completing a mission through the enemy turn. Use your mind to pick the unit for the situation. Don't think of what is a good or bad idea based on how many army construction points the unit coming back is worth compared to resurgence points. You are not gaming the system by picking 5 Metamorphs. In one of my games, I had killed all of the light infantry in my opponent's army, and all I had left was 3 wound possessed and chosen, and tanks. So I let the pure strains and the neophytes die, and brought back the acolytes with auto pistols and mining weapons when they died. 6 mining weapons at damage 3 cut down a unit of possessed, and the tools have anti-tank 4+ to get through the tank's high toughness. That's what you do with Cult Ambush. As this is strategic reserve, you can wait and hold units back until a good secondary mission comes up, but I found that getting them on the table as soon as possible is almost always the best choice. The Cult Ambush markers are useful if coming back through them would be the fastest way to get onto the table. If you die in your own turn by Overwatch in the charge phase or in the fight phase, coming back on a Cult Ambush marker is faster to get your unit back into the fight or score victory points. Pure Strain Genestealers love Cult Ambush markers because they can advance and charge and get into combat even with the long run up from a Cult Ambush marker kept away from enemies from picking it up. But we should talk about the final day detachment since that is the focus of the video. The detachment basics: up to half of your army can be Tyranid units with the Vanguard Invader keyword. These units. There is no Tyranid army rules like Shadow and the Warp. That is when your army is Tyranids and you are playing Genestealer Cult to use this Genestealer Cult detachment. Because of how the detachment works, you will want to get very close to that 50% Tyranid side. You don't have to, but the closer you get is generally for the better. Still focus on the Genestealer Cult side as the core of your army. It is far easier to boost the prowess of the Genestealer Cult with Catalyst than the Tyranid side is to boost with Psionic Parasitism. For Psionic Parasitism, you need Synapse units to make it happen. The draining ability to transfer wounds rarely came up. I did it once every third game. There is almost always something better to do than pair up units to organize wound transference. In the previous version of Cult Ambush, opponents would maybe leave a couple of our models alive in a unit that couldn't do much, but being alive prevented us from making a Cult Ambush roll to bring back the whole unit. Now that there are resurgence points, opponents will know how many we have left and what we can bring back. I would have cult icons wherever I could to counter this. So you could drain the last few models in one of your units just because, and then bring them back with your resurgence points. But the timing is bad. Sucking the cultists off the board takes place at the end of your movement phase, so they would be a cult ambush token in your opponent's turn or come back in the reinforcement step of your next turn. It's a long time to wait, and there is an argument over the wording and how Feel No Pain works. The detachment rule, reading it as a rule, if you save wounds from Feel No Pain, those are not lost wounds. Your Tyranid models regain up to that many lost wounds. Those words seem to suggest that if you tried draining a unit of Aberrants, and you rolled a 3 on the D3 plus 1, but the Aberrants Feel No Pain saved 2 of those wounds, you would get 1 wound back on your Tyranid unit. The other way of reading it is in the context of stock Games Workshop phrases. Regaining lost wounds is a phrase to remind you that you can't go above the starting number of wounds. The less we have to rely on the rules commentary, the better. Then it makes more sense if you read it as regains up to that many wounds. It can be read either way. Also, what if there are only 2 neophytes left and you rolled a 3 against them? Both neophytes die, but does that Tyranid unit heal 2 or 3 wounds? It's something that needs an FAQ, as it can be very easily read either way and we don't know the intention behind it. I go with my opponent's interpretation, assuming you are not in a tournament event with people to call over and ask. And I rule against myself if I'm ever winning. So I go with, if 2 wounds were lost by Genestealer Cult units, not saved by Feel No Pain and not wasted because the unit was already dead, the Tyranid unit would heal 2 wounds, even if I'd rolled a 4 on the dice. We'll reach a consensus eventually. As I said, this didn't come up much. But Catalyst is the basic rule that does come up a lot. It is the important rule in this detachment. While an enemy unit is within 6 inches of one of your Tyranid units, Genestealer Cult units get +1 to hit against that enemy. It is an easy rule to misunderstand. 2 opponents looked at it or listened to me explain it and still thought that it was Genestealer Cults within 6 inches of friendly Tyranid units got +1 to hit. That is not correct. The Tyranid units need to be within 6 inches of enemy units, and Genestealer Cult units that attack those enemy units get +1 to hit. It works for Genestealer Cult shooting or the fight phase. 3+ is our common combat hit roll, 4+ is our common hit roll for shooting. Going from 3+ to 2+ is better than 4+ to 3+ because of the percentage increase on successes. A third extra hits with shooting, or halving the number of failures in combat. I would focus on the Genestealer Cult combat units when list building. It is simpler to pull off in the fight phase. A Tyranid unit 7 inches away will do nothing for your shooting, unless you use one of the stratagems. Combat is easier because that unit 7 inches away can charge, and then your Genestealer Cult unit in combat with the same enemy or nearby will get the bonus. In combat, this often does involve the Genestealer Cult and Tyranids within 6 inches of each other, but it is not needed. They just have to be within 6 inches of the enemy. It's not even needed for the Hyper Ferocity stratagem, and Hyper Ferocity is the stratagem I used the most. Reroll wound rolls of 1 would be okay on high strength attacks like Aberrants with an Abominant, but I prefer units like Metamorphs outside of the Biosanctuary Brood Surge. It works really well on metamorphs with a Biophagus attacking infantry that are toughness 4. With the Biophagus bonus, you will be wounding on a 2+, and are re-rolling failed wounds. You don't need Tyranids nearby to do that. Really, it is to reward you for playing this detachment properly and having Tyranid units nearby for full reroll to wound. Reroll all the wound rolls. Any combat unit wants this. Pure strains with a Patriarch especially, as you can reroll all of the dice to try and get as many devastating wounds and tear into enemy tanks. In this detachment, positioning is everything. You need your Tyranid units near the enemy and your Genestealer Cult units doing the damage. If you mess up positioning or one of your Tyranid units gets shot and loses model so it can no longer reach an enemy with the Catalyst Aura, the Psi Surge stratagem gives you contingency plans. It is very necessary to make combos work. I have already done a video on my initial impressions of this detachment where I went over the basics of what these all do. This is more how the stratagems work in practice. Avenge the Star Children scares the enemy, with their best unit being the target of +1 to hit and +1 to wound for the rest of the game. Let your opponent know that you can do it. Angron didn't charge my winged Tyranid Warrior Prime. 5 Berserkers charged instead. They didn't kill him. They died instead to his damage 2 attacks, as expected of Captain Flappybat. He got to fly around and provide more +1 to hit auras for my Acolytes and Neophytes. It encourages your opponent to make mistakes. But you can use this stratagem on every Tyranid character you lose. Divine Imperative gives you +1 to charge, and you get a free reroll to that charge roll. It makes charging from Deep Strike more likely, but it is still risky. You charge with a Tyranid unit first, and it could be any unit. Could be gargoyles, and the Genestealer Cult will try and save them. For any long charge, you would probably have to use command point reroll anyway, so it is an okay choice. It can help units charge to help Trigons, Morlocks, or Hive Tyrants that can endure multiple fight phases. If you need to charge with a Genestealer Cult unit because the Genestealer Cult unit is a great damage dealer, or it would get some Neophytes onto an objective and then you have the objective control to hold it, have a fast-moving Lictor or Von Ryan or Death Leaper unit charge in first in the charge phase to give your Genestealer Cult unit the chance to use this stratagem and then benefit from Catalyst. But you don't have to use it when coming from reserves. Then there are 2 stratagems that are really more Tyranid focused. Darting attacks is useful on the Tyranid units that don't have fight first. You could either use it in the shooting phase to shoot even though you fell back, or in the charge phase to charge even though you fell back. If you fall back and charge, you fight first. Or you can move away from some pointless fight to get closer to a different enemy unit and charge in near the Genestealer Cult to provide the Catalyst Aura in the coming fight phase. I know the stratagem says you can shoot and charge, but also note that it only says until the end of the phase. So it's either fall back and shoot, or fall back and charge. There are very few shooting attacks in the Tyranid units we can take. Gargoyles have guns and can move after shooting. This is an option that lets them redeploy very far. As they can fly, they can fall back from enemies without having to take desperate escape tests. The Winged Hive Tyrant can also have a gun, but the twin-linked combat weapons of Bone Sword and Lash Whip are too good to pass up. Resistance Tunnels is the 6th stratagem. Tyranids or Genestealer Cult can go down and then come back up. Any unit. You can use this on bikes, on monsters, on vehicles. If you see that the enemy has lost enough units that they have an unattended objective, send a unit underground and go and claim it. Or this is a great time to bring on that spare unit waiting in Cult Ambush if you had any. You can have the Morlock go underground and come back up to strike once more from the deep. More on the Morlock later, because we have to talk about the enhancements. 2 of them are good, 1 of them is okay, 1 of them is also there. Enraptured Damnation lets you ignore Overwatch. You may want to put this on one of your units coming from reserves. Deep Strike right into the open, and the enemy can't shoot you on your turn. Or it's nice to have a Patriarch rushing Infernus Marines in turn 1. But whatever it is, whether you're rushing forwards or deep striking, you will want to charge, and can do so near to torrent enemies. I really wish we could have this enhancement in more places. Of course, in Crusade, you can have this enhancement on any character, and it travels with them between detachments. Inhuman Integration is another really good enhancement, better than I was expecting. It works in melee and shooting. Unfortunately, you have to be attacking an enemy that's within 6 of a Tyranid unit. But that is the Detachment. It's great on a Patriarch going in with Von Ryan's Leapers. Turn 1, you can organize and plan these things, so you can increase your damage output from pure strains who are rerolling wounds, getting devastating wounds, and also have sustained hits, for more attacks that are rerolling wounds and getting devastating wounds. The stronger your turn 1 punch, the more lasting damage you can do to the enemy. Synaptic Auger is the double sucking enhancement. It is here. It gives you twice the heal without having to do twice the damage. It's not needed, as it is only likely to be effective on a winged tyrant, and I did very little psionic sucking, preferring to get my models into position to score missions, set up charges, or be near to the enemy to get that catalyst bonus. And my Tyranid units were not near other Tyranid units. They were near Genestealer Cult units. But Vanguard Tyrant is a nice one if I had a Hive Tyrant and if I had the points spare. It upgrades the Hive Tyrant strength and AP, which will make up for the lost Synapse bonus that they would have had in the Tyranid army rule. Being in Synapse range gives you extra strength as part of the balance patch. But that is the third enhancement I would consider. We are going to be taking Tyranid units. This is not a detachment that works without Tyranids. Technically you can, but you really shouldn't. You need the Star Gods with you. This is all of the options you can have and what I suggest. Have some Von Ryan's Leapers. You can get a big aura from 6 of them out in a line, but 2 units of 3 is better. They can go and do their own things in different places. One of them may fail a charge, but the other unit of 3 may pass. Then your Genestealers will get the aura, something that wouldn't have happened if it was 1 unit of 6 and they failed their charge in the first place. A unit of 3 is easier to hide, and they can go in first turn with infiltration alongside Pure Strain Genestealers and a Patriarch. This lets you know that at least one of your combos will work because you set it up so well turn 1. Positioning and also point scoring gets harder as the game goes on and you lose units. Knowing you have one great punch turn 1 is very good, if you go first. If you don't go first, don't worry, you deployed the Von Ryans behind the Pure Strains. The Ryans can have a first turn heroic intervention for 0 command points, and they have fight first, which mitigates the 1 penalty of heroic intervention. If you don't get the first turn, having loads of fight first on Lictors and Leapers is great. The Ryans are 10 points more than a Lictor, they have more models and a wider catalyst aura and more wounds. If you messed up the deployment position of your Pure Strains and Patriarch, you can redeploy the Pure Strains with the Primus and still infiltrate. You can't redeploy the Tyranids, only Genestealer Cult units, and positioning and targeting is everything for Genestealer Cult armies. So get the Leapers positioning right. Keep them safe. In turn 1 or any time, they are wonderful at killing 1 wound enemies, guardsmen, battle sisters, cultists, Kroots, and so on. Those enemy units score victory points. We don't want the enemy to do that, and Leapers are fast and capable of killing them. Lictors are an awesome point scoring unit for secondaries and a great assassin in theory. It is a good standard to compare other Vanguard Invader units, but they cannot reliably kill enemy characters. As with almost all precision, unless you have precision unit-wide, like the new Black Templar stratagem, you are often better off killing your way through the bodyguards until you get to the character. Their buffs to units stop working when either the character or the bodyguard is dead. So you can't rely on Lictors to kill any character, but it is a cheap toughness 6 lone operative character for actions. It's very fast to get closer to enemies and give that +1 to hit for the Genestealer Cult. You can rapid ingress from standard reserves for free, so you can set up the catalyst for the coming turn, and know that you can make your charge with the Lictor so that the Divine Imperative stratagem can be used to help deep striking Genestealer Cult units get into combat. Because the Lictor special rule specifies rapid ingress, you can also rapid ingress another unit in the same turn. I prefer rapid ingress for Genestealer Cult units, because failing charges can mean the death of fragile Genestealer Cult units like Acolytes. As a lone operative, you can rapid ingress your Lictor 12 inches away and stick your claws up at the enemy as they can't shoot you. The Neuro Lictor is another similar one. It's good to get close to the enemy to provide that catalyst bonus, but it also impacts the enemies with an aura of -1 to enemy hit rolls if they are battle shocked. They don't have to be attacking a Tyranid unit for that -1 hit to be applied. Yes, also Tyranids in 12 inches get +1 to wound against battle shocked enemies. The Neurolictor can cause battle shock in your command phase, but that relies on the enemy having bad leadership. 6+ leadership is very common in the armies you are most likely to face. A lot of people play Space Marines of one colour or another. I prefer the cheaper Lictor that can do much the same things in this detachment. Without the Shadow and the Warp Tyranid army rule, the Neurolictor is not as powerful. The Parasite of Mortrex is more expensive than a Lictor and does much the same thing. This is an option if you got the Combat Patrol magazine. The Parasite is a model you get in the last Tyranid issue. The Parasite can create Ripper Swarms with its barbed ovipositor. Why is it barbed? Oh, yeah, so you can't pull it out. You can add Ripper Swarms to your army even though they are not Vanguard invaders. That restriction is when making your army list, before you get to the table, before you ever assign characters to units. So you can't turn up with non-Vanguard models, but brand new summoned units without the Vanguard invader keyword can be added. Death Leaper is a more expensive Lictor with a better save, invulnerable save, and is a character, though not a Synapse one. Not a bad alternative to a Lictor. If you have a few points to spare, having Death Leaper instead of a Lictor is a better choice than throwing an unnecessary enhancement on a character because you had some spare points. Gargoyles. They are great for the Catalyst aura of +1 to hit. You get loads of them, they can spread out in a wide area, they can move after shooting so the Psi Surge stratagem is not as needed. If you deep strike, you can shoot and move closer to provide the aura. Or advance move up the table and shoot with their assault weapons and then move 6 inches more again. They will get into range to provide the Catalyst aura very reliably. You could rapid ingress them so that in the coming turn, you have them where they are needed. Hiding on your side of the board before rushing forward is also a good option. With 18-inch range guns, they are very likely to be able to shoot something somewhere with at least one gargoyle, and you don't need to hit to trigger the Winged Swarm ability. A cracking unit. The Winged Hive Tyrant is one of our big monster smash characters, and they let you use a stratagem for 1 command point fewer, as in this detachment, like for free. And it can be on any Tyranid unit within 12 inches, and it is free each turn, not battle round. Most other characters have it only once per battle round. So you can have expanded Catalyst. You can avenge the Star Children for free when it or another character nearby dies. You can freely order the Morlock back underground with resistance tunnels, or get a unit, usually itself, to fall back and charge with darting attacks to get into engagement range of the next enemy unit that needs to die. This means you're saving your command points for the Genestealer Cult to use Hyperferocity against that target. They are a great part of the Genestealer Cult tactics. Wipe out the enemy, 1 key unit at a time. The Winged Tyranid Warrior Prime, well, a lone Warrior Prime is bait for Avenge the Star Children and is another okay point scoring model for behind enemy lines, but Lictors may do it better. The advantage is the Warrior Prime can deep strike and it can fly around and provide the psionic parasitism to boost the monsters back up. Swapping some toughness 3 wounds for toughness 9 wounds is in our favour. With Gargoyles, they increase the Gargoyles' leadership by 1. There is no Synapse leadership in this detachment, but they don't provide much else of value. The Prime would get a bodyguard, but we know that we are okay with them dying. And then they can be avenged. Raveners are another option. I don't like their guns. The guns are very minor. Focus on the combat and then you don't accidentally kill some enemy models that would make your charge harder. It is better to have a 4+ save. They can deep strike, but I don't. They are fast with 10-inch movement and can get around to provide that Catalyst aura. Their own inbuilt down and up ability is good. Just because you can do it with a stratagem doesn't mean you shouldn't take units that can do it naturally. That is another theme to lean into, and it spares you spending command points. I don't take Raveners because Von Ryan's Leapers are basically the same, and the Leapers have Infiltrate, Fight First, and Stealth at 5 points cheaper and the loss of only 1 attack. Genestealer Cult armies don't like enemies that prevent units arriving from reserve within 12 inches. Infiltrate gets around that by being very close to the enemy at the start of the game. The Tyrannocyte is an option. Technically. Don't take it. You have no reason to. The Tyranids we can include all have Deep Strike or Infiltrate. You don't need the Tyrannocyte for anything. Don't drop from orbit, come from below and
get snuck upon.
The last option is a big monster, a Trigon or Morlock. I can't decide which is better for final day. The Trigon got hit by the no deep strike abilities within 3 inches change, so now it is only within 6 inches, so they can't turn up on the opposite side of an objective from their enemies and be very hard to shift. Trigons having 12 damage 3 attacks is very upsetting for tanks and Terminator types. I like that! The Morlock can cause mortal wounds to a range of enemies when it is set up within 12 inches, and with resistance tunnels it can be sent back underground to come up again. As many babies with basic communication such as giggling will tell you, playing peekaboo is fun. However, some damage to a few units is not as good as a lot of damage to one unit to wipe them out. We have enough Genestealer Cult and Tyranid units with damage 1 that we don't need the Morlock's 16 damage 1 attacks, even though they are quite high strength. We want a big monster to smash, and the Trigon can do that. If there is enough cover, they have the speed to move quickly and attack the enemy once the Von Ryans and Pure Strains have removed screening units in the first turn. This is the unit to heal with the Psionic Parasitism, just to get out of the -1 to hit bracket if nothing else, and the Psionic Parasitism also gives you +1 to hit, so you could switch from hitting on a 4+ to hitting on a 2+. It may take a lot of wounds on the counterattack, but it is unlikely to lose all of the wounds. Those are the Tyranid units. For the Genestealer Cult units, I'm just going to go over a few key Genestealer Cult units rather than listing every Genestealer Cult unit. With a significant part of your army being Tyranids, you don't have as many Genestealer Cult units to worry about, so we're only concerned with taking the best ones for this detachment. The Patriarch and Pure Strains are right up there. They love the Hyperferocity stratagem. You really want to be on a flank. You shouldn't rush face first into the middle of the enemy. That gives them easy heroic intervention, and you get swamped and crushed. Pure Strains are fast. Hit an enemy on the flank and go for something else next turn. Having Ryans or a Lictor on each flank gives you the pair to support the Pure Strains when you go in. You can wipe out a flank of the enemy, and that Patriarch will then survive surprisingly long throughout the game. The Primus is good for 2 reasons. They can redeploy infiltrators, but not Tyranids, and that ability can be used off the battlefield. You can also deploy some units on the table as dud drops to see what your opponent puts down in the deployment phase, knowing that you will then redeploy the Patriarch and 2 other units you put on the table will go into reserves. With a unit like Metamorphs or Acolytes with mining tools and Hyperferocity, you can reroll all hits and all wounds for that unit. Within Raptured Devotion, you are immune to Overwatch and can deep strike in front of a heavy gun unit like a Gladiator Reaper and charge it. You just need to make it. This is where the Divine Imperative stratagem comes in, but you may end up rolling a 7 and even less on the reroll, and then your unit is sat out in the open like right plonkers. Haha, imagine if that happened multiple times in the same game. So it is better to rapid ingress, walk around the corner immune to Overwatch, and then charge in with a shorter charge distance. While the Winged Hive Tyrant gives out free command points to the Tyranids, the Genestealer Cult Nexus can do the same for his side. Once per battle round, use a stratagem on his unit at 1 command point fewer. If the turn order fell the right way, you could rapid ingress on the enemy turn 2 for free, and in your turn 3 you charge and have a free Hyperferocity on the accompanying Metamorphs or Acolytes. 60 points, the same as a Lictor, so that is the balance. Do you have enough Lictors? You would only want to take 1 Nexus. If you don't have a more expensive Primus, who is admittedly in one of their worst performing detachments, a Nexus within Raptured Devotion is a good alternative. The Locust is good fun for the theme of fight first alongside the Ryans and Lictors. That is matchup dependent. Creations of Bile and World Eaters were not appreciative of getting stabbed first. But you have diminishing returns on fight first as you alternate between your units fighting first and their units that are fight first from charging. So if you can help it, don't get all of your fight first units charged at the same time. If you need help understanding fight first, I have a video explaining most if not all of the interactions. A lot of people don't like the Locusts. I rate them quite highly, because as soon as you can stab the enemy first, your incredibly fragile cultists can live longer. It wouldn't be a Genestealer Cult army without a Ridge Runner. I would have the Ridge Runner with a mortar. So you shoot an enemy with the mortar that is within 6 inches of the Tyranids, and the -1 to hit from indirect fire is mitigated. Hit enemies before the Genestealer Cult units go into combat with them. Now the charging Genestealer Cult unit will have +1 to hit, an extra -1 AP on their attacks, and potentially is re-rolling wound rolls. With that boost, Pure Strains can be more dangerous here than in the Biosanctic Brood Surge. Ridge Runners with mining lasers are also useful. We don't need the spotter, as we can get +1 to hit from friendly Tyranids, so choose the Survey Auger to remove cover. While Lictors are very good at completing actions, Neophytes are 10 cheap bodies for primary and secondary missions. You can deep strike them in to be a snack for a Hive Tyrant if you wanted. I never did, but it's something you could do if the surviving Neophytes could also do something useful in that area. Aside from Pure Strain Genestealers, Metamorphs and Acolytes with mining tools are the combat units. Include a cult icon. If nothing else, in your next turn you can recover lost models parasited away to the Tyranids. An icon is worth the loss of a Handflamer. When picking the Genestealer Cult units to include, if you wanted to try and make this a shooting Genestealer Cult army with their guns supporting the combat of the Tyranids, you can. I think that is less optimal than a combat build, but with shooting you could consider demo charges running in and hitting on a 4+, or a Jackal Alphas included so you can reroll hit rolls of 1 for any Genestealer Cult unit shooting that target. I find that combat feels more satisfying. Here are the army lists, the refined army lists. There are 2 army lists I ended up with that I was happy with. It is fun to make army lists with this detachment. With points so low on Genestealer Cult models, we are a horde in every detachment. There are lots of models to paint and then transport. Allies can make up for that. I know some players went from the Index to the Codex, and with points changes and the changes to Imperial Guard Brood Brothers, outside of the Brood Brothers Auxiliary detachment, their 2,000 point army became a 1,300 point army. Tyranid monsters can make up for that and are fun to include, even if this army is not going to be around forever. Its rules may only last until the end of 10th edition at the start of summer 2026. How quickly can you paint a Trigon? You can lean into the monsters, as big models are something we lack within the Genestealer Cult roster. At 1,000 points I didn't bother with draining and big monsters. Your units end up spread out across the board completing primary missions. Have dedicated pairings of units to get Catalyst on your Genestealer Cult, and then many small Genestealer Cult units can deep strike and complete secondary missions. I play this as the Tyranids are here to make my Genestealer Cult better, instead of sacrificing cultists to make the Tyranids better. This is a Genestealer Cult detachment. You are playing Genestealer Cult with guest speaker God themselves. Cheap cultists win games. Position them to score victory points, not for keeping your monsters alive. Every dead Hive Tyrant is another Star Child to avenge. Neophytes are good for sticky objectives, plan generation in the making. If they would end up sitting on an objective doing nothing, with resistance tunnels, they can go underground and get to another objective to score more victory points and sticky it in your coming turn. My 1,000 point list had the theme of lone operatives and fight first. A Patriarch, 10 Pure Strains, and the Inhuman integration is the first strike part of it. They are supported by the Von Ryans. You target a flank with the infiltrating Ryans and Patriarch to do damage to specific units, and if you don't get the first turn, you won't get focused down by everything in the enemy army. Specific units would be the enemy units that are good at killing your infantry, and high objective control victory point scoring units. I have a Locus for the theme of fight first, but you could have an Icon Ward or a Biophagus instead. They would want the Enraptured Damnation, no Overwatch allowed enhancement. Whichever of the 3 characters you pick, they would go with 10 Acolytes. You can Rapid Ingress, yes, Divine Imperative exists, but this is usually safer. Those 10 Acolytes will be Acolytes with mining tools and auto pistols. There are 10 Neophytes for objective holding. A Sanctus with a knife, and that is another theme, no Overwatch. If you have a Sanctus with a knife, the enemy is not allowed to attack you with Overwatch. And as a lone operative, they can hold objectives and complete secondary missions without getting shot, even if it's not by Overwatch. The Achilles Ridge Runner has an auger and a mortar. They provide that -1 AP and optional ignore cover. Captain Flappy Bat is alone to provide the aura of Catalyst by flying around. There are 10 gargoyles and another 10 gargoyles to do the same thing. We know the 3 Ryans are there to support the Patriarch, and we have a Lictor which can infiltrate and complete actions and secondary missions, or they can also rapid ingress, and they can do it after another unit has done it. So this list has the theme of fight first as a backup to enemies moving faster than expected or some bad charges. There are 2 lone operatives for secondary missions. The Lictor can go and support the Genestealer Cult, but the Winged Prime can do that too. With 6 resurgence points at this level, and nearly half of our army being taken up by the Tyranids, it doesn't leave us with many options for what can come back through Cult Ambush. 10 Pure Strain Genestealers are 6 resurgence points in December 2024. They are most likely to die first, and they are the ones that can come back very quickly from Cult Ambush markers because they can advance and charge. It's like a free rapid ingress. They wouldn't get the Patriarch's devastating wounds, but they could still make good use of hyper ferocity. The 10 Acolytes or the 10 Neophytes are other options for your resurgence points, but if you do either of them, you are leaving resurgence points and not able to spend them. 10 Acolytes is 4 points. That leaves you with only 2, not enough to bring back anything else. 10 Neophytes is 3 points, which again doesn't leave you with space for anything else except for more of the same unit of 10 Neophytes. But that doesn't matter. Points are there as optional things to spend. If it is better to bring back Acolytes with mining tools, bring back Acolytes with mining tools instead of forcing yourself to bring back the Pure Strains. How many victory points you have at the end of the game is what matters, not how many resurgence points you have left. Keep that in mind. I picked this army's Tyranid side partly from the Leviathan starter set, the one you got at the beginning of 10th edition, or the Tyranid Combat Patrol. It's a very good place to start this army. You get the Winged Prime, you get 3 Von Ryans, you get 20 Termagants with Flesh Borers. Add tiny butterfly wings, there are some gargoyles. Their base is about 3-4 millimeters smaller than the flying stands, but it depends how much you care about that. The Psychophage is on the same base as a Morlock. If you have it on its hind legs, it would look silly, but it would have a similar profile. Again, it depends how much you care about being box art accurate. My 2,000 point list also needs some more work put into it, same as the 1,000 point list. But it works quite well. The Hive Tyrant would want a Lash Whip and Bone Sword, but with Vanguard Tyrant your monstrous Scything Talons are strength 8, which means you're wounding on a 2+ against the common Chaos Marine profile. A Blender Tyrant with all of the claws works well. My model has a Venom Cannon that does not perform so well. With only a few Tyrant Claw attacks, you don't want to upgrade the combat side. Having 3 Von Ryan units gives you a lot of mid-board presence, and with a unit on each flank, you can deploy or redeploy the Patriarch and Pure Strains to puree your choice of enemy. They consistently performed for me. You can have 2 units of Ryans on one flank. That would prevent one unit from dying to a very lucky Overwatch, as I've experienced, and the Pure Strains would then be left without their key bonuses. That would mean no +1 to hit, no sustained hits, and no re-rolling all of the wound rolls. The Ryans can also be a forward screen for the Trigons. If the monsters get hurt, that is where I had a Neophyte unit in reserves to be rapid response medics, of a sort. The other Neophyte unit stayed on the home objective. I didn't have a Morlock. I went with the Trigon. People have this fantasy in their mind of popping up near 6 units and causing 20 mortal wounds, and it just doesn't happen. You have to be 9 inches from the enemies and within 12 inches of them. I managed 3 units and that felt unusual. I killed 2 Space Marines. In combat I killed another 2. In lore terms this would be exceptional, but this is not a good performance on the table. A Trigon gave me more consistent results, and with higher damage, it can fight mounted units, elites, tanks, other monsters. There's a lot it can take on. Lictors and Death Leaper complete secondary missions and actions, but can move forward to aid Genestealer Cult units, which allow the Sanctus and the Kellamorph to score as needed. I was more protective of the regular Lictor and more cavalier with Death Leaper. As a character, he can be avenged. There was no Neurolictor. If you were building your army to really focus on the psionic suction power and the +1 to hit on Tyranid monsters, they would work. They are synapse. They have lone operative to facilitate being nearby, but not really near the enemy. That is a lot more positioning to organize. A focus on combat and on Genestealer Cult worked best for me. Simple plans are often the best, especially with a complex army, and you make it simpler by throwing in a couple of monsters. The Gargoyles and Ridge Runner support the Metamorphs and the Acolytes. In some lists I had another Ridge Runner with a mining laser instead of more lone operatives. I started the mining laser Ridge Runner on the board and then removed it with the Primus, giving me that deployment that wasn't really a deployment. Coming from reserves, it could shoot once the Tyranids were close to the enemy, without risking some models that would make the charge harder for the pure strains. The Gargoyles were more focused on being around the Metamorphs. With a Primus to reroll their hit rolls, the Acolytes didn't need the +1 to hit as much as the Metamorphs. I haven't fully run the numbers, but Metamorphs hitting on 2s and wounding on 2s with AP -2 wiped 25 wounds worth of Space Marine bodies with a Captain. It felt about average. The 10 resurgence points you get at this size game were spent on the pure strains and the Metamorphs, or the Acolytes if they died sooner and I needed more anti-tank compared to anti-infantry. As the Star Gods required, we shall provide. This is 1000 points of Tyranids and 1000 points of Genestealer Cult. I don't think it's a perfect list. It can get better, but it's only been 1 week. I would prefer another Ridge Runner and the Vanguard Tyrant enhancement, but losing the utility characters from the Genestealer Cult side left me short on scoring. And to add anything to the Tyranids would mean I had to lose Tyranid units as they are already capped at 1000 points. You can make variations of this list to match your collection and switch out parts that didn't work for you. This has worked okay for me. If you're thinking suddenly, wait, no Winged Prime? Are you telling me that someone ran Angron at 1000 points? No. I used to have the Winged Prime at 2000 points, but the points didn't work out in the final version of the list. Or the current version of the list. There is always more that can be improved. In 2 of the games, I played these units as part of a Crusade game. When you are playing a Crusade campaign, you can include Tyranids on your Crusade roster, but unless playing this detachment, you can't have them in your army, and they level up very slowly as a result. Because our units die often, and replacement units don't get XP for things like completing agendas and killing units, the replacement units are added temporarily to the army, but not to the roster. Everything levels up slowly for the Genestealer Cult. This is a hard detachment to play. You have to get the unit pairings and the placements right. It's not easy. If you lost your Tyranid units, you have tunnels and a weaker hyperferocity stratagem. That's it. Your opponents can shoot the big ones, as is the lore-accurate way to defeat Tyranids, and it works. Then we just have cultists with no support. But it's fun to have Tyranids and Genestealer Cult on the table. If you have both sets, you will have fun with this detachment. Final Day is my 3rd favourite detachment, not counting the Index. Which one's your favourite? Could it be Xenocreed? I hope it's Xenocreed because I have a video on how to play them right here. My darlings and viewers, have a great day of 40k.